All right, hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible, verse by verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in, First Kings, and we're going to be studying. We're in First Kings chapter 3. Now, here's a good question for all of us: what if God asked you, or, well, let me put it. What if God asks you, I will give you anything you ask for. Anything you ask for, I will give you anything you ask for. What would your answer be? Now think about that. What would your answer be? Now, to me, and this is sidebar, I think a lot of ideals come out of the Bible that people use. For example, the genie in the Bible, not the genie in the Bible, but the genie in the bottle, right? Where a genie comes up and pops up and grants you and say, I'll give you 3 wishes. Okay. All right. So anyway, I think it's a ripoff from the Bible. That's just me. But it's an interesting question. How would you answer the question? Well, if God was to ask you that, whatever you want, you get one question, how would you answer that question? Solomon answers the question wisely. Now, it's kind of funny because Solomon is, even in a sense, already showing wisdom. And I say that because his father, David, really thought Solomon was weak. Kind of a mama's boy. But as we have seen so far, Solomon has shown great, to me, wisdom in how he has carried himself. Remember, there were things in which Solomon did, how he handled his brother, how he handled different other people. He shows some degree of wisdom. But let's go to it. 1 Kings chapter 3. God's going to even give him far more wisdom than he could have imagined. Okay? Alright, so verse 1 says, Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, by marrying Pharaoh's daughter. Solomon brought her to live in the city of David until he had finished building his palace, the Lord's temple, and the wall surrounding Jerusalem. So it's kind of getting a overview here. Now, this isn't Solomon, as we're going to see, as wise as he will become, will also make some of the most foolish decisions you can make. And one of these decisions is marrying. Now, he's doing this for political reasons. And I think it's a bad choice because he should have relied on the Lord. But he's marrying an Egyptian woman, right? To have an alliance. Now, in the natural world, that's probably good, but I don't think he needed it. God would have protected him. He could have and should have went to the Lord and says, Lord, give me wisdom. Lord, protect us. Right? Lord, guide us. But anyway, so he does that. Now, verse 2, however, the people were sacrificing on the high places, because until that time, a temple for the Lord's name had not been built. Now, by the way, this is going to be something that is going to be a plague throughout, from here onto the Babylonian exile, which would be about 500 years. Okay? So the time of the kings is the period of about 500 years. Don't hold me to the exact number, but you're going to see this phrase that they are sacrificing on high places. Now, high places, Jerusalem itself is situated on it's on a high elevation. In other words, you always see that you're always going up to Jerusalem, or you're coming down from Jerusalem. Jerusalem is on a high elevation. And what was thought in the ancient world was the higher in elevation you get, the closer to the gods you would get. So they would find these high elevated plains and locations, and they would build these altars and things like that. So in verse 3, it says, Solomon loved the Lord by walking in the statutes of his father David, but he also sacrificed and burnt incense on high places. Now, the implication here seems to be to pagan gods, not only to the Lord, and which is one of the main reasons why they use these high places. And again, we're going to see throughout that high places, there's always going to be this plague on them, the stumbling block. Verse 4, the king went to Gibeon and to sacrifice there because it was the most famous high place. He offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in the dream at night. God said, "Ask what I should give you." Solomon replied, You have shown me great and faithful love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, righteousness, and integrity. You have continued this great and faithful love for him by giving him a son to sit on his throne as it is today. Now, as I said, notice the question that the Lord asked him. What should I give you? How would you answer this? Let me give you another point before I move on too, because I kind of like this question here. And as I was reading this, if we go back in David's time, I think it's second Samuel, towards the end of David's life. Okay. David messes up, and I think it's the last chapter of 2 Samuel, as a matter of fact. David messes up. Remember, he numbers the army, and so God says, okay, well, I won't kill you. Okay, I'm going to have mercy on you. But I will have to judge you. And then God gives him 3 choices. He says, I'm going to give you 3 choices. You choose. 3 years of famine. Okay. Which would have been devastating to the land, right? 3 months under the hand of your enemies. Bad. Or 3 days under my hand. Now, which one would you choose, right? If you had those 3 choices. Now, of course, that's a bad choice. I mean, in other words, he sinned, and like either one is bad. But David chose wisely. David said, well, 3 years of famine, that would really be hard. Could you imagine having severe drought, no food, right? No electricity in our day. No food, no supplies, right? Devastation. Okay. But then he said also 3 months under the hand of your enemies. Now, we kind of got an image of somewhat, what if we're looking at how bad things are in Ukraine right now, right? And at the time of this writing, we're going into maybe 6 months. But think about 3 months, and think about if Russia wanted to really say, I don't care about America, and really go and start invasion using nuclear arms and stuff. Nuclear arms. So 3 years under our enemy. David said, I certainly don't want to fall under man. I don't want to fall under man. Wise choice. Never fall under man. And he says, I'll choose God. I'll choose God. And I don't even know if God even went all 3 days. because God said, he relented and he saw the anguish of the people. But here David is going to now show him what his answer is. He could have said, give me riches, give me the life of my enemies, okay? But watch this. Verse 7, he said, Lord my God, you have now made your servant king in my father David's place, yet I am just a youth with no experience in leadership. So this is what David feared about Solomon. Your servant is among your people you have chosen, a people too numerous to be numbered or counted. So give your servant an obedient heart to judge your people and discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? Now, it pleased the Lord that Solomon had requested this. In other words, of all the things he could have asked for, notice this. So, verse 11. So God said to him, because you have requested this and did not ask for long life or riches for yourself or death of your enemies, but you have asked discernment for yourself and understanding judgment. I will therefore do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has never been anyone like you before, and never will there be again. In addition, I will give you what you did not ask for, both riches and honor, so that no man in any kingdom will be your equal during your entire life. If you walk in my ways and keep my statutes and commands, just as your father David did, I will give you a long life. So now God says, I will give you not only that, but I will give you more. I will give you what you didn't ask for. Now, while I would say this, it is always in our interest to ask for wisdom. Wisdom is always better. Think about this. If you could ask, now, again, at the time of this recording here, the news, I think it was last night, that someone won $1 billion lottery. In fact, as I think about it, they won it not too far from me, in one of the suburbs where I live. Okay, but here's the interesting thing about that. So the lottery is designed for that, isn't it? To give money. But what if you don't have wisdom? So what if you don't have wisdom? And that is the interesting thing. Do you have? In other words, you can get $1 billion, but I can tell you right now, if you don't have wisdom, they will plow through that $1 billion. And it is certainly possible that a person can do that. We have seen people plow through millions of dollars all the time. Wisdom is the profitable thing. All right. And so right here we see why Solomon is known as the wisest man who have ever lived in terms of his wisdom. Verse 15, then Solomon woke up and realized it had been a dream, and he went to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he had a feast for all of his servants. Now, one of the things we also know is that Solomon was forever offering burnt offerings. Okay, he really offered burnt offerings. Verse 16. Then 2 women who were prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One woman said, "Please, my lord, this woman and I lived in the same house, and I had a baby while she was in the house. On the 3rd day after I gave birth, she also had a baby, and we were alone. No one else was with us in the house. There's the 2 of us there." Now, kind of interesting about prostitution, right? They didn't have what we know today as they didn't have birth control, So pregnancy was very easy. So she got pregnant, guess what? But they were also known as prostitutes. So they didn't have respect either. Verse 19, during the night, This woman's son died because she lay on him. She got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while your servant was asleep. She laid him at her breast, and she put her dead son in my arms. When I got up in the morning to nurse my son, I discovered he was dead. That morning when I looked closely at him, I realized that he was not the son I gave birth to. So even this woman who thought, remember David thought the same thing. He thought that if he can just go out there and get, when he had his affair with Bathsheba, he can just come home and bring Uriah home, her husband, have him sleep with him, have the baby. And he was foolish enough to think that people would not notice. David, that's your son. Okay. Verse 22. No, the other woman said, my son is the living one. Yours is the dead one. The first woman said, no, your son is the dead one. My son is the living one. So they argued before the king, and the king replied, this woman says, this is my son whom is alive, and your son is dead. But that woman says, no, your son is dead, and my son is alive. The king continued, bring me a sword. So they brought a sword to the king, and Solomon said, cut the living boy in two, and give half to the one and half to the other. Now, even though to me this seems one of the dumbest things you could ask for, it was actually a sign of wisdom, and we're going to see why. The woman whose son was alive spoke to the king because she felt great compassion for her son. My lord, give her the living baby, she said, but please don't have him killed. But the other one said, he will not be mine or yours. Cut him in two. Now this woman was kind of heartless. Well, first of all, why is she fighting over a son that is not hers? And then in spite would rather say, no, let us both have dead sons. Verse 27, the king responded, give the living baby to the first woman and don't kill her. She is his mother. And all of Israel heard about the judgment the king had given, and they stood in awe of the king because they saw that God's wisdom was in him to carry out justice. So now we see these couple of things here. Justice right here. David was a man of justice. He was a person that that God carried out, as I said, justice for him. He was a person of justice. Now, what is interesting is that wisdom, true wisdom, is always seen in its works. There is a wisdom that you see the Greeks have. Paul talked about it in Corinthians. There was this wisdom where people would sit around, and actually we kind of call it philosophy sometimes, but in theological circles they call it apologetics. And but the philosophers, they sit around and they would talk about stuff and analyze stuff and dissect stuff, right? That's wisdom. There's a natural wisdom. James even said that the natural wisdom is devilish, sensual. God's wisdom is plain and simple, but it is wise. It is knowledgeable. And this is the wisdom that Solomon had. And so this, and again, you can always see, you never have to tell people how wise you are. People will always see that, and we're going to see this as we move on in Solomon's life. For example, the Queen of Sheba will come, and she will just behold, look at everything that he's done. She will see the works in his wisdom. Okay, so that's what wisdom is. All right, guys, chapter 4 in the next study. Excuse me. I will see you then. Look, don't forget to like and like and subscribe and share this video and then hit that subscribe button. That's what I wanted to say. Okay, guys, I'll see you in the next study.